Our heart is an amazing organ. It pumps blood through our veins into all the tissues of our body, including our brain, including the heart itself, all of our muscles, our bones, and basically is our life source, keeping us alive, keeping our body oxygenated, removing the waste. When our hearts don't work quite mechanically as they are intended, then we run into issues. Things like becoming unconscious, very low in oxygen, blacking out, stumbling over things that you wouldn't normally, and having shortness of breath are some examples of the symptoms that can occur when your heart is not performing optimally. For Corey Camp, to understand what he was going through, you need to put yourself in the mindset of an elite athlete, somebody who trains really hard every day, every week, every month, every year for these big swimming meets, to get your body in a state where you can perform at your optimal peak performance at those exact moments when you need it the most, to bring home a winning performance for yourself and your team. And yet, Corey had an undiagnosed heart condition that was leaving his body lower than normal oxygen levels and unable to stay conscious through especially periods of intense stress. I'm going to let Corey share his story and some of the triggers that he realised were bringing on episodes of this condition that he had and eventually did get diagnosed with, and what he has done since that time to work through getting a better quality of life and still be able to compete and participate in sports and life that he loves so much. Enjoy. Have you ever had one of those gut-wrenching moments where life ground you to your knees and you found yourself asking in despair, why me? This podcast is all about sharing your stories and journeys, from asking why me to declaring this is why me. Discover how ordinary human beings like you and I have found their extraordinary levels of hope, courage, compassion, and provided a new perspective for greater potential and self-empowerment during their darkest defining moment. As a creative artist and coach myself, my guests and I discuss the interconnectedness of emotion and transformation in those moments, and how their actions then seize the opportunity for discovering their unfiltered and authentic voice, and ultimately their life's purpose. I invite you to join me each week as we share insights into how adversity can be turned into a unique advantage. So today's guest is Corey Camp, fellow podcaster of The Athletic Mindset and More Than Movement Coaching. Corey learned a bit about fear and overwhelm when diagnosed with a heart condition during his collegiate and national swimming career. As an athlete, Corey realised how important mindset was in accomplishing what he strived for in sport, life and business despite that condition. He now helps retired athletes transition into a successful post-career life and applies his understanding of the power of a community who understands how to support each other through life. I will quote from his website, coreycamp.com. I've realised that sport and movement is so much more than just doing a set of push-ups or going for a run. It's about the mindset and the intangibles that come with it. Sports are fun to play, not because we work hard while we're doing them, but because of the community, the structure, and the accountability they provide us. I am a believer that this doesn't have to be limited to your playing days. Your athletic mindset can shine and serve you in a post-sports life, and I'm here to show you how. Welcome to the WhyMe podcast, Corey.
I love it. I wish it sounded that good in my head when I was writing it, Vera-Lee, I appreciate you having me. It's exciting to connect with people, especially now, like I'm in DC and you're down under in Australia. It's crazy the power of social media and all this bringing us together. So thank you. I just appreciate your time.
You're welcome. And it's really great to have you here. And we start with all the big questions first, such as what's your least favorite food?
Least favorite? Man, I could name favorite like so quickly, but least favorite. Anything canned, really. Like, not a huge fan.
Oh, there you go. That's really interesting. Canned tuna is like one of my staples. I love it.
I like fresh tuna and stuff like that, but just not out of the can.
Yeah, fresh is so much better. Now, if you had to choose one book that's impacted your life, what would it be?
I would say recently, I'm just looking at my bookshelf here. Recently, Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins has been, within the past like year and a half, very inspirational, very just motivational and sense of, driving me on a daily basis.
Awesome. I'm going to add that to my list. And I think I will be making a list for people when they join up the WhyMe Movement newsletter to start having access to some of these books, create a bit of a catalogue really, because there's so many great recommendations from everybody.
Absolutely. I'm sure you probably have you could start a book club with all the.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Now, how about you tell us a little bit about your story, Corey?
Awesome. Well, basically, you hit on it. I swam my whole life, and I started probably when I was 4 or 5 years old. My dad swam in college. He's a swim coach, and he, believe it or not, didn't really push me into the sport, but introduced me and said, "Hey, if you like this, I'm here for you. I support you." So went through, the average. I was not a great swimmer. I wasn't a bad swimmer for a while. It wasn't until about 14 that I started to really hit my stride and started to win some stuff on the local scene here and start to make it to the junior national level meets and stuff like that. As I'm starting to get faster and faster through high school, the dream was always to swim in college. I wanted to swim Division I, and I wanted to get a scholarship. And just as this is starting to happen, my junior year, feeling really good, going into my senior year fall is when recruiting trips start to happen and talking with these college coaches. And right at that time, I started to have some heart condition symptoms show up. So I'll never forget, there was one Saturday morning where wrapping up a 3-hour practice and we're swimming some sprints off the blocks. And I hop up on the block. Something doesn't feel right as far as I'm just can't really catch my breath right before it. But whatever, my mindset was just, I'm just going to put my head down, go and do this next one, and then reassess. So I do it and I get to the other side, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with pools, but there's the bulkhead. So it was the divider between the well and the shallower end. So I hop out and I'm on the bulkhead, which is just maybe a 3-foot wide strip for those not familiar. And as I hop out, I just lose vision.
Wow.
And I don't know why. Maybe the fact that I was 17 years old, that I decided it was a good idea to just try to walk to the end of the bulkhead to get to the side of the pool instead of just chill out where I was.
Right.
So I start to walk, and as I'm walking, vision gets worse and worse to the point where it's literally black. And my last step actually is my left foot just going right into the water, and I face plant onto the deck. What was the crazy part there is I knew what happened to me. I didn't like lose memory or black out in that sense. But to everyone else, all it looked like was I just misstepped. And they were like, is he okay? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know what happened, guys, but my heart was racing and I lost vision. And sure enough, I went to the ER that day, couldn't find anything. And I was like, I'm telling you, this is what was happening. And this kept going on and on in the practice setting. Fortunately, it never happened into a meet. But for about a year and a half, this kept happening every once in a while. And I kept going to see all these top rated cardiologists in the States here, going to George Washington Hospital. We have Georgetown, like all these top doctors. And I'm telling them my symptoms. They're treating me through all these different tests. It was quite ironic being like 18 years old and running on a stress test treadmill in like a cardiologist office, because I was the youngest one that even like my parents were probably the next youngest in the room, besides me and maybe the doctor. So I was like crushing these stress tests. Nothing was showing up. I had to wear a heart monitor for like a month or two on end, where it was just always on me and going to school and stuff.
Wow.
The problem was the heart monitor wasn't waterproof, so I couldn't wear it with me when I would swim. And that was when these episodes, as we started to call them, would occur, was only during swim practice. So I had all this unknown crap around what was going to happen to me. And it was tough with that coinciding with the recruiting process, because I didn't know how it was going to impact me beyond high school. Luckily, I found the University of Delaware, and I was pretty straightforward with the coach about, hey, just so you know, like this is happening to me and I don't know what it is, and I don't know the lasting implications of it. And he said, don't worry about it. We'd love to have you on the team and we'll figure it out like together as you're here.
Great attitude.
And I was like, that meant everything to me. At that point, I knew I had to sign there, because I hadn't had that same response from a lot of other coaches. For better or for worse, though, throughout my freshman year, it kept happening more and more frequently. As I started to like mature, I noticed that it was really centered around large stressors in my life, and if I didn't handle them well. So like when my grandmother passed away my freshman year, like clockwork, a week later, I had a series of bad episodes at practice. When finals were coming up, like series of bad episodes, like, okay, like I'm starting to catch on to why it's happening, or how I guess it's happening, but I don't know. The doctors don't know what the thing is. I started to loop in, obviously, the school's school's physician on what was happening to me. And he was way more concerned than I was. I was like, dude, it's never happened in the competition setting. We're good. And we basically, that my freshman year, spring, we're about a month out from our conference meet, which was the big accumulating competition of the year that we trained all year for. And I had an episode about a month out, and they sent me to sports medicine, and the doctor said, hey, I can't clear you to swim in CAA's, the conference meet, if this happens one more time. We'll talk about stressful. Can you imagine? You could probably guess what happens next. About a week later, I have another one, and my coach of my group, not the head coach, the coach of my group, knew about this. Like, if I had one more, I couldn't swim. And as I'm experiencing it, him and I just kind of exchanged looks, and he was like, is it happening? And I was like, no comment. And he was like, okay. Like, he was willing to turn his head the other way. And I'm forever grateful for that, because that meet, I had the best meet of my life at the time. Ended up getting second in the mile that year, was named the first ever male conference swimmer of the year for the University of Delaware. So it was like all these accolades that happened that made me like reaffirm why I swam. And all of it like almost didn't happen because of these events. So it was cool. It was definitely leaning into the unknown of, I quite literally didn't know what was going to happen. I obviously didn't like being told from someone else that I can't do what I love to do. And that's just compete and swim. So when that was threatened to be taken away from me, I was literally ready to go to whatever length possible to make that still happen, even if that meant, I don't even know. Is that unknown? You know what I mean?
I do. Gosh, I'm just, as you're recounting that scene, I'm just thinking, like you said, the stress of that moment, but also the pressure on yourself to not have an episode when you're competing as well. Like you've managed to get through, you've managed to, get past that incident, which could have been the end of it all. And you have performed extremely well. And yet as a sports person, as we know, we spend all this time preparing so that the unknown doesn't happen, right? So that we essentially know every possible outcome that we can control in our sport wherever possible. And yet here you are with the biggest thing of all, really, and you don't know when it's going to hit. That's really scary for an athlete at any time, but particularly for such a big meet.
Yeah, I think athletes, we love control, right?
Yeah.
Like we will, I mean, if it was up to us, it would be 75, it would be the perfect weather, it'd be the perfect conditions.
Yeah.
But this really taught me I don't need complete control to still get the outcomes that I would be proud of, as long as my effort was there. Right. And that's what I've really taken from this whole experience was stuff's gonna happen the way it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Only thing I can control really is how my effort is.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. And what an epiphany to get at such a young age, really. Some of us go all our life before we realize that that's the case. There's always certain things that we cannot control in our life and a lot of adversities. And this is the WhyMe podcast. So we are talking about adversity and how we've overcome adversities in our lives. One thing that we know is going to happen is adversity. It happens in our life whether we can control it or not. And so, yeah, it's a very, very important lesson to learn that can help set you up so that when adversity does come around, you're at least mentally prepared on some level to know how to approach it.
Yeah, I was about to say, like stress is important for growth.
Yeah.
You need the adversity or the struggle to develop new skills that you otherwise wouldn't have. And it's, I think, one thing to read about these concepts, like your output being, more important than the outcomes. But when you're presented a struggle, some adversity that really makes you live that's when it actually clicks up here rather than it just being words on a page.
Yeah, for sure. Before we get into a little bit more of that sports mindset, I was wondering, did you ever end up getting a diagnosis and has the condition continued or is that something that's corrected itself?
Yeah. So right after that meet, freshman year, I was introduced to a cardiologist up in Delaware, and his name's Dr. Wiener. And he was a phenomenal doctor, and a family friend introduced us, and he said, I have an idea of what it could be, but there's no guarantees. We're going to have to go through this surgery. It's minorly invasive. They go in through the veins in your groin. And it was called an EP study with possible catheter ablation. So what he thought he could fix would be just basically burning off parts of my heart, if that was the case. But it was a study because it wasn't guaranteed. So I went to the hospital up there with my parents, and it was about a 4-hour procedure. What was very interesting about it was I was only partially sedated. So because they knew that it was stress induced, what they did was, I mean, I was partially sedated with IV and everything, but they also, through my IV, pumped in pure adrenaline to stimulate stress response.
Right.
And in doing so, it actually showed itself. So what I ended up being diagnosed with was called AV node reentry. And for those of you not familiar with the circuitry of your heart, it starts off with the SA node, and then it goes down to the AV node, and then it's supposed to go, tell the rest of the heart to contract and go back and restart. What was happening for me on my AV node, there was a few cells, quite literally just a handful of cells,
Wow.
that were just rerouting that signal the wrong way, back up to the SA node to come back down. So short circuiting my heart, so much so that what I was experiencing was heart rates ranging from like 300 to 350,
What?
sometimes up to 400.
Oh, that's
So when
massive.
when I was having these episodes, my teammates and my coaches could quite literally, and I'm going to take their word for it because I lost vision as a side effect, that my heart was literally beating out of my chest. So with that, when your heart beats at that rate, your blood pressure drops because it just can't maintain that volume through each pump. And that was why the vision would leave. I would kind of get tingling sensations in my fingers and my toes because of just lack of blood flow to those areas. Luckily, the study was successful. It showed the cells, and I'm still mind blown, like telling the story, is with this little catheter, they were able to just burn off the like 2 or 3 cells that were causing this major issue in my life for so long. And, outside of the recovery, it was about a 2-month recovery process of just keep the heart rate low, letting the scar tissue on the heart heal. Because it was so minorly, just a few cells, like there was been no lasting implications. I haven't had any major episodes like that in years. Actually, I want to say it's been a year and a half since I officially got cleared from the cardiologist that I don't have to come back on a yearly basis, which was huge being told that. So it's luckily in the past, but it's still taught me a ton.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about the heart, I'd love to know how or if this affected you at all. I know a number of people who've actually had open heart surgery and had their heart transplanted by someone else. And each one of them has said that it was quite profoundly emotional. Did you get any effect like that after the surgery, or? I mean, it's a little bit different, but because it's still your heart, but I was just curious. Yeah.
I mean, I would say I got emotional in the sense that I learned never to take the stuff that my body could do for granted anymore, because for 2 months I couldn't really move like I was so used to. I mean, like I said, I came off from this meet that was the best of my life at the time. So physically I felt fantastic. And then I go through this, and it was minorly invasive, but because they went in through the veins of my groin up to my chest, that meant all of that area was bloated with just swelling after the surgery. And I was like, man, I'm used to being this. I was a really, really skinny distance swimmer. And like all of a sudden now I have this bloated midsection that I was just like, I didn't even recognize myself for a while there. That would be the only, I think, emotional feelings I had afterwards. It's just like, what is going on here?
Yeah, it's a very interesting moment when you sort of don't recognize yourself physically. And I know that through my illnesses, which I'd always had certain illnesses that I'd grown up with, and like you, I would just push through, and I still got to a really elite level with my sport and everything. However, I never quite got to the potential that I could have had I not had those conditions. And so they were always very much at the forefront of limiting my own performance. And yet, as I went through some very significant trauma as an adult, I got very, like they really exacerbated. I got very, very sick and then got put on a lot of cortisone. And then not just in my chest, but everywhere. I blew up like a balloon, and I would literally be like Michelin Man. Like my wrists, there were literally rolls, like the Michelin tire man. They would just blow up so much. And the problem was, because I was on this drug for so many years, I then couldn't get it off. And so fluid turned into fat, turned into just this blob of a person that I became. And the sicker I got, the worse it got. And there were so many moments I'd look at myself, and I had like the opposite of a body dysmorphia that a lot of people with eating disorders have, where they see themselves as much larger than what they physically are. I was the opposite. I got a shock every time I looked in the mirror and saw this huge person in front of me. I'm like, that's not me, but it is me. It was really weird. Yeah, such a journey.
Yeah. How has that been since? Have you?
Yeah, well, I got up to 196.4 kilograms in weight, which is huge. That's kilograms, not pounds. So I don't even know where that would fall in the pound scale of things. Extremely stupidly, morbidly obese. And so I've dropped about almost 70 kilos of that myself, but it's taken 6 years. And I was doing this, as my health is getting better. And it was difficult because a lot of people would, if they didn't know me, they would look at me and make a judgment about me and be quite open about those judgments to me, because all they saw was this really large woman, who was quite ill, and they'd make this assumption that it was my weight that had was causing the illness. It was the other way around. And so, yeah, I fought through a lot of training, very intense training for me. It was literally 3 steps and I'd collapse. So I just worked my way up and worked my way up. And I started playing lawn bowls because I couldn't play tennis anymore. So I started playing lawn bowls, and, within 2 years, we talk about the athletic mindset. Within 2 years of picking up my first lawn bowl, not only had I conditioned my body enough to last a whole day of playing again, I actually won the singles club championship at what is a very large club in our area. And I never doubted myself because, I was the one out there for hours every day, conditioning myself, practicing those skills, doing everything that I possibly could and having the right mindset. So come up against, seeded players in the first round and was like, yep, bring it on. I was so used to performing under pressure. It didn't matter who I was playing. Basically, I was like, yep, I'll just play my best. And it was good enough to win that year, which was pretty awesome. It was interesting because I cried at the end of it. And I think most people thought I was crying because I won the championship. It wasn't really about that. It was actually about that massive journey that I'd gone through, from being bedridden or collapsing after 3 steps to actually being able to be there. And the winning was a tiny little bit of it, but that wasn't why I was crying. It was just such a moment of relief to work towards something for 2 whole years. Every single night I was out there for hours, and that's something that I think you understand, in sport. You spend all these hours and hours and hours training, conditioning, getting your mindset right. And the reward at the end, the winning, is really great. However, what I learned was that the reward at the end is how that mindset becomes a part of you, so much so that you don't need to focus on it and teach yourself that part of it anymore. You just are, and you just approach life, everything in life, business, life. You approach it all with the same mentality, which is just so beneficial.
I love it. I want to acknowledge you. You have a beautiful journey there.
Yeah, thank you.
It's incredible to see people use, like, momentum can be either your best friend or your worst enemy. And like when you're on the drugs and the health is declining, that's when it's obviously working against you. But the fact that you were able to have that moment and turn it around and start pushing towards something like that, where it accumulates into this journey, obviously from the outside looking in, it's a championship win. Awesome. fantastic, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, as far as just it becomes a part of you. I mean, I remember going to job interviews out of college, and these recruiters would be like, okay, so like, what can you do? And they were like, you don't have a lot of experience on your resume. And I was like, yeah, that's because I was swimming, like for so long. It took up so much of my life, but I promise you, like the skills that I learned there are going to be tenfold what Joe Schmo did interning at whatever company, in the summers. Like, I don't know. I was like, look, I swam distance. I stared at a black line for about 4 hours a day for about six days a week. I guarantee you I can get over whatever you put in front of me. It might not be right away, but if you give me enough time, it will happen. And I've, since moved around from different jobs, different companies, finally just decided I'm going to bet on myself because that's what I've been doing all these years anyway. Yeah. And I'm just going to coach, and I'm going to be in business for myself, where we talked about controllables earlier, right? Like there's a little bit more control when you're the boss, but then also everything else falls under you too, where I find myself answering emails. I'm the graphic designer for the company. I'm everything, just good and bad, right? But all the mindset stuff that swimming taught me, and staring at the black line especially, is just, to me, a reminder that it can be boring at times. It can be painful at times, but there's always going to be an end, or a thing to achieve. So that kind of keeps me just pushing on to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why sports people often make such good business people, because they understand that the boring stuff needs to be done. And you've just got to put your head down and do it. There's no ifs and buts about it. You're procrastinating about it is only going to delay the inevitable. And this is something that as soon as you play sport at a decent level, you understand this. And so I was the same, going out on the lawn bowls field on my own most of the time, or practicing with my dad, who was my practice partner. It was one of those two scenarios. And every time I was out there on my own, I would still go out for 2-3 hours. I was doing that same skill, looking at the same green, putting those same 4 balls down and walking to the other end and doing it again. And you just get used to that, okay, I'm in that mode. I'm in training mode. Let's get it done. Let's get it done. Let's get it done, and let's do it better. And let's just look for those tiny little improvements, because you are focused on that end goal. And what you discover through that process is actually to be grateful for how good that can feel in your body as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk these days about like finding your purpose and your why behind what it is you do. And I think that's where athletes struggle so much post-sport, is because forever they were told their purpose was to be a really good physical athlete. But if you can find something that aligns with what you want to do, then that same thing, the process, the long hours, the skill, day, rep after rep, it applies exactly the same.
Yeah.
But the passion has got to be behind it, just much like sport was. And there's always going to be something out there. It just might require you to get really creative in thinking of, how can we create this? It might not be a standard 9-to-5 job that provides you this sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, as an athlete, you do get a little more ability to think outside the box, because if you're faced with a problem, and for you, let's just take your condition that was happening, you've got to think about ways around that if it's going to happen, or anything that you can do to try and stop it happening, or to be better conditioned when it does happen, so it's not going to affect you as much. And in business, we often need those skills. You also touched on something else there, which is that concept of burnout, So yes, we're determined. Yes, we're used to doing the hard slog. We're used to putting in the hours. You also need to learn how to not overtrain and how to avoid burnout too. So how do you teach people about that?
That was something I learned, another thing through swimming. Any of the very intensive cardio sports, it's not like, I always joke, like, it's not like football, right? Like, don't expect me every week to show up and put forth like a lifetime best time in my events. What happens for swimming and running a lot is there's a very heavy dosage of training for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And the better you get, the more stress you can kind of take on for longer periods of time. Mm-hmm. But you have to train and work out up to that, right?
Yeah.
That's why having coaches is so integral in avoiding the burnout, because they're almost acting as like the governor on your car to make sure that you're not going to spin out at, whatever speeds. Yeah. That you're kind of, okay, this week we're picking up our speed, and the next week we're going to taper off a little bit. So what I've really come to realize, like, my best meets were after months and months and months of really, really hard training. There was little micro breaks in between, but then like right before I had to perform, we tapered and our training volume went really down.
Yeah.
And our performance then like slingshotted up. The funny part about taper from a physiological standpoint is you actually get worse at first.
Yeah.
And that's like so mentally just like, what's happening, that it's a struggle for a lot of people. They don't trust the process. And I found when you really buy into the taper, as long as you have a coach that really knows what he's doing, it's going to work out. Mm-hmm. So the trust goes both ways. And I think how it affects and can help people now is knowing that it's okay, even with the athletic mindset of being like, let's grind it out. We're mentally tough. We're going to work and put in all these hours. When you're stressing your body, it needs rest to recover.
Yeah.
And then rest helps support taking on more stress. So it's a cycle. And if you're trying to do one without the other, if you're trying to stress yourself without rest, that's when burnout occurs. If you're trying to rest without stressing your body, that's when laziness and nothing happens.
Yeah.
What I mean?
That's right. Yeah, I do. Such a balancing act, really, to be able to peak just at the right time. And as you said, this is especially important for long distance events and swimming and events like this where you're not competing year in, year out. So you take sports like your tennis and other sports like that. They do a little bit of tapering, but it's certainly not to the same degree because they're competing every second week. They're in another big tournament. So they're pretty much always got to be on. So it's a very different style. It's more like a mini tapering. It's Vera-Lee from Australia, the founder of the WhyMe Movement and podcast. Well, one idea, one vision, one person. This self-funded podcast and movement has started to take a life of its own, which is exactly where I had planned it would be. To hear the stories of the far-reaching impact across many countries in this world, it humbles me to know that my vision is shared, understood, and positively influencing people to look at the changes they can make for their own adversity and how they can find the strength, the courage to be inspired and feel connected and empowered to use their adversity to their advantage. One of the best ways that you can help support the WhyMe Movement and podcast is to subscribe to the various channels, such as the podcast platform you are listening to this on now and the YouTube channel, which has much bonus content released. By subscribing, you will make sure that you are one of the first to find out who is coming up next, more about our guests,
and the interesting questions that I ask them, which do not get released on the podcast platforms, and lots of other good bonus content. I always love reading your comments, and so please feel free to leave them on each of the platforms. The beauty of social media is that you can easily share single episodes or any of that bonus content from YouTube onto your own social media platform with your friends, which helps to bring this positive, inspiring message to far more people, allowing you to be an active participant in the WhyMe movement and vision. On Apple Podcasts, it always makes a big difference if you can leave a rating, review, and subscribe to the show. Let's get back to today's story.
Yeah, what was always funny to me, I guess I was a taper swimmer, like especially in the distance events. I was 30 seconds plus faster at a taper meet versus like a regular. And that's in the mile. It's a longer event, obviously, but yeah, that's what I mean when don't expect me to go lifetime best time every single week, because it's just not going to happen. Every once in a while it did, but sometimes you need those conditions just right.
Oh, absolutely. And also how you talked about trusting the process, because this is the thing, and having trust in the people that are guiding you. And look, this applies to business and life as well, that if the people around you who you're looking to for support and encouragement and guidance, if you don't trust them or they don't trust you, if that's not a completely open and transparent relationship, then doubt's going to creep in. And when you're performing anywhere, whether it's sport or business, anything, and you're under high pressure, that's when the cracks are going to come out. And one of the things that I've recognised with people that I know who have been high-level sports performers and are in high-pressure jobs, they do handle the pressure usually far better than other people who haven't had that experience, but there is still a limit.
Oh, yeah. 100%. The more you do it, the more you're able to take on the higher,
Yeah.
The peak performance happens when your skill, like just outside of your skill and challenge, like it's got to be a good balance of the two. If it's too high of a challenge and you doubt your skills, like you're just going to be anxious and overwhelmed and all the negative feelings that none of us want to feel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if it scares you a little bit, then it's a good spot. That's when your breakthrough performances are about to happen. And yeah, you find it in sport and in business kind of simultaneously. I look back now in my career and it's like the best years were the years where I 100% trusted who was around me with my teammates and my coach. And the years that weren't my best years, there was a little bit of doubt there.
Yeah.
I could say it till I was blue in the face that I trusted them, but subconsciously there was some doubt there. So that's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. Absolutely. And that is a nice little bridge into us talking a little bit about what you do and having that community, and just talking a bit about what you touched on earlier, in that, as a sports person, you spend your life and essentially your identity gets wrapped up in this one thing that you do so well and that you put everything into. And very interesting interview I did with one of Australia's top lawn bowlers, Lee Schreiner. I think you'd really enjoy listening to that. And he talks at one point about, he just won the world championships. That was as much as he could achieve in his sport. And so then it was like, well, what now? And so he had to then rework out, well, essentially my identity was in that, and now I don't have that. I'm not going to put myself through everything that it required to achieve that again, because I've already achieved it. And to achieve it, I sacrificed so many of the relationships that were important to me along the way. And so he had to almost reinvent himself. And from what I understand, you do help people with getting that community of people who are retired from sport. And so, they understand that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically what I do now is I call it personal performance coaching for former athletes. It's in a group setting, but I also work one-on-one with people. But it's creating that space and meeting them where they're at and saying, hey, look, I know when you do something, and twisted part about sport, right? Or anything really. It's why retirement is so hard for people in their 60s or 70s, whenever it happens.
Yeah.
When you do something for so long, and the better you are at it, and then all of a sudden you're told, hey, you don't do that anymore.
Mm.
It literally, quite literally feels like a piece of you has been taken away.
Mm.
And if you don't have the right mindset, or sometimes all it is just a simple reminder of, hey, this is what you've done. Like, let's find how it applies here. And I serve a lot of times as just an extra set of eyes to take a different perspective to these problems that are showing up in people's lives. And it's like, what behaviors can we change? What mindset shifts need to occur to start working better for you and more efficiently versus the funk that you're in, so to speak.
Yeah.
And really what we do, or what I do, is I just help these athletes take an audit of their life. And we look at what's I call their life scorecard, really 9 different areas of ranging anywhere from the physical to the mind or the soul. Soul being like your purpose, your motivation, that kind of thing. So we look at those 9 areas on a scale of 1 to 10, and no one has like a 10 out of 10 in all 9 areas.
Yeah.
And if they do, I encourage them to come talk to me, because I'm curious how they achieve that.
Yes.
So that's what I do, is I help people move up on that scale. And through that work, I'm still learning it myself. And that's the beauty of what I do, is I learn something new from every person that I work with as well.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. So you get to grow as well as helping them grow. Excuse me. You get to grow as well as helping them grow, which is a really great way of doing it. And I love that you can bring that different perspective, because sometimes we have skills, and if, like you said, we're caught in that funk of where we're at that point in our life, sometimes all it does take is someone else who understands, who knows where they're at, and can show them that different perspective to go, okay, and tap into that conditioning that they already have of, well, I know how to set a goal and work towards it, and I know how to break up a really long-term goal into short, obtainable goals. So how can we apply that to something else that you're passionate about?
Yeah, it's literally no different, right? And it sounds so simple, but when you're caught up in it, it seems like so complex that it's the most frustrating question in the world. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? What's my purpose?
Yeah.
And all it takes is another set of eyes sometimes, and a person just to meet them where they're at and say, you too? Like, yeah, I'm here with you, man. Like, we're all in this together type thing. It takes a lot of having to check your ego at the door, which I think the more elite athlete people were, the harder that may be.
Yeah.
But really, that's where the profound like growth and work can come from, if you're able to just set that aside for a second and say, hey, it's okay to get some help on whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I suppose in one way, athletes are primed to be coached. So they are going to look to someone else for guidance, which sometimes people who haven't gone through that experience and understand the depths of that relationship and how much it really can help you, particularly when you're at low points in your life. Some other people struggle to understand just how important a coach can be, whether that be sport or life or business or any other area.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I totally forgot for a number of years. Quite frankly, I was like, well, I'm just going to do this by myself. I'm going to put my head down and work hard like I know how to work hard. And then Like, I reluctantly hired a coach this past year for my business. And I was like, why did I do this years ago? This is wonderful.
Yeah.
Like, she's literally telling me what to do and when to do it and giving me deadlines versus I was wasting hours like Googling things. You had the answers. I didn't have. And that's, again, I had to check my ego. But for a while, I was letting my ego be like, you're going to be 100% self-made and make this thing happen. And I didn't want to accept any help in the process.
Yeah.
We're not meant to do any of this stuff alone.
No.
In podcasting, right? Like, you bring in guests and it brings a whole different dimension to your show, and it makes it that much more dynamic. Yeah. Not that you don't have a story that's worth sharing personally. Like, I do solo episodes as well, but my favorite, quite honestly, is when I bring in other people and just it shares a different perspective with the audience.
Yeah, totally. Like, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because initially when I decided to start this podcast, it was going to be in a format where I would interview someone one day and then I would do like a recap or basically like a mini coaching session afterwards. And after recording, I don't know, 8 interviews, I was like, no, this is the show. Like, it doesn't need me. And enough of my story comes out in bits and pieces. And, one day I'll share a bit more of my story on an episode here or there. But really the show isn't about me. And that's why originally it was called Vera-Lee, WhyMe podcast series. And I flipped it around and said it's the Why Me with Vera-Lee, because I'm the host. And so I'm just there essentially orchestrating the collection of getting the guests here and asking the questions to get their story told in a way that the listeners will be able to respond to. And I'm just loving it. I'm loving the connections and people like yourself. I mean, I mentioned to you before we started recording, I was really excited to do this interview. I was the same with, I've been the same with everybody for different reasons, but I was the same with Lee Schreiner. I was the same with Kelly Ray, because my background is elite sports. And so I really grasp and understand what it takes to get there and everything and how that applies to life. And for me, I'm so far out of the actual competing side of things, lawn bowls aside. I was so far out of sport for so long because of these physical issues I had. For me, I love it. I just love it. Love connecting with people that are on the same wavelength.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I do what I do now, right? There's this underlying language that we all speak as having competed at a certain level, right? Through movement. I've never played the sport that you keep mentioning. What is it called?
Oh, there's lawn bowls and there's tennis. They were my 2 things. Okay. But I was also a champion swimmer as a kid for many years. So
yeah, I was about to say I've never played long balls, but I understand at its core what goes into why you do it and what you need to do to be successful. So that's why I love my podcast I've had a few, NFL players, pro sports leagues across the states here. And, when I first started, I thought I had no business talking to these type of people. But as I do it more and more, I was like, oh, this is perfect. Yeah. We have so much shared experience, even if it's a different realm. At its core, the principles are still the same.
Oh, they absolutely are, really. It doesn't matter. Essentially, it doesn't matter if you're at grassroots. And this was I say our because we had a family business in sport. And I coached tennis from a very young age because my dad coached. And so it was very much this mentality of, okay, you start right at the grassroots. Don't save it for when people get to the elite level. You want people getting to the elite level. So at the first place, you got to start them with the right mindset, the right mentality, the right training regime from a grassroots level. And that was what we focused on. And that's always been a strong passion of mine, that it doesn't matter where you're at in the scale. Everybody gets treated with the same opportunity because you don't know the potential of someone at grassroots level, because if they've not given that opportunity, you won't know either. You won't discover it.
Yeah. And I mean, I've coached mindset stuff at all ages now. You know, the youngest I think I've worked with is like 10 years old. And to some people that might be like, isn't like really young to start working on mindset. I'm like, well, we don't know. Like, should we wait until they're 18 years old and then have, let's talk about these mental skills training, or is it something, a bug in their ear and obviously I'm going to teach it different to a 10-year-old than I am an 18-year-old or a 40-year-old, however old the person may be. But yeah, I think it's all a scale, and wherever they're at, they can still benefit from coaching.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny that you just used it being 10 years of age as an example. When I was 10 years old, and I asked you the question about an influential book that you'd read earlier on, when I was 10 years old, my father gave me a book called Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. Now, this was one of the very first self-development books, and he was the person that first coined the term of self-image. And I learned so much, and I didn't actually realize, I didn't remember how much I'd learned from that book. I always remembered the book, and I bought another copy of it, and I grabbed it a couple of months ago, and I started reading it, and I was like, whoa, I just didn't remember how much I had embodied into every way that I thought and just was, and it sort of, it was one of those moments. I was like, geez, this is a full circle moment. Like, here I am at 46 years of age, reading this book that I read 36 years prior. I was only 10, so I probably only comprehended 70% of it. And yet it's essentially been the manual that I've been living my life by. It's so cool. So you're never too young. And like you said, you teach them in a slightly different way, but it's still important to get those messages. And the younger you start, the more opportunity people have to keep growing and learning.
Yeah, I was about to say I'm a firm believer of why wait on making something happen. And that's not to say like be impatient with stuff, but start working towards what you want today. We're really good at telling ourselves these stories of why not now? If we always listened to those, we wouldn't have started podcasts. We wouldn't be here. You know what I mean? Like, the timing is never going to be 100% right. There's going to be that unknown that you have to jump into a little bit and just say, let's do it. Let's start today. It's not going to be, it doesn't have to be perfect. The first few goes. Yeah. And there's still stuff that I'm figuring out with everything, business, podcasting. Yeah. It's all a learning curve.
Yeah, for sure. And again, we'll talk about the sports mindset just really quickly to wrap it up. It creates that mentality of being an action taker, and you will take uncomfortable action, and you actually become very used to uncomfortable action. And so comfortable action doesn't even really ever come into it, because, you continually strive for something else. So once you achieve it, okay, what's the next thing? Oh, I've achieved that. What's the next thing? What's the next level? And you can use that to so many areas of your life to benefit if you know how to do so.
Yeah, I was about to say it's all about stepping into that discomfort. So much. I mean, I learned that so much so, and it probably resonates with you too, that I found more comfort in the discomfort.
Yes.
Sometimes than I'm really good at, like, when things are cushy and going well, I'm like, okay, what's wrong?
Yeah.
Like, this doesn't seem right, so to speak. So, finding that comfort in the discomfort for sure, whether that's physical or mental. We said we have to stretch our mind, quite literally. And when we do it in a systematic, structured way, like sports provides, the neurological connections go up, dense gray matter in different areas of our brain get active, builds and expands. And that's the really cool stuff, is quite literally neurological changes are happening inside of us as we experience these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that endorphin rush you get
from sport, you can get the same thing achieving other goals in your life too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I found really interesting actually recently, I discovered through consuming other material, reading research and all that, was dopamine is actually released into our body throughout the process. It's not when we reach that final goal, it's our body secretes it as a way to just let us know you're on the right path. So when people say like, trust the process and all that, quite literally your body tries to support that by secreting dopamine to different things. It's why we like checking our phones, right? And seeing we got one more like or one more comment on a social media post or something like that. In of itself, those one, that one like or that one comment doesn't really mean anything, but for whatever reason, we put it towards this larger picture. And we get excited each time we get one. And it can be used for achieving stuff in sport or in business, or it can be achieved in addiction and the dark side of like being addicted to your phone. It's twofold. Yeah,
it totally is. And again, in my experience, a lot of athletes I know almost have that addictive personality where if they don't replace, once they leave and retire from sport, if they don't replace that with something positive, sometimes they can very quickly go down the other route and become addicted to other things that aren't going to lift them up and serve them. And so, it's definitely about making the choices. And again, this is where having people that you trust around you to help guide you. When you're an athlete and you're used to that and you leave the sport and you don't have that, that's something that quite a lot of us need to get back. So that connection.
Yeah. The most dangerous thing for any athlete, current or former, is free time. Right.
Yeah.
We're so used to never having it.
Yeah, that's right.
And I found that when sport ended for me, it was like, I could be a normal college kid. This is awesome. And like 3 months later, I was like, okay, I need something back in there, to structure it again.
Yeah, that's it. Look, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I get the feeling that you have too. And
100%. I appreciate your time. It's funny with the time difference. I feel like I'm waking up as we go through this discussion. You might be feeling the opposite.
Yeah, like I said, it was 5 a.m. when we started in your time zone and 8 p.m. in mine, and I'm probably not that far off going to bed because I get up at 4:35 a.m. as well. So, it's quite funny.
I love it. I'm glad we were able to make it work.
Yeah, for sure. So, Corey, just lastly, if people would like to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
I was about to say they can find me on Instagram at Corey Camp, no E in my name. Website is coreycamp.com. So I made it pretty easy to help find me. Always down to connect with some new people and see where they're at in their journey. And if there's anything I can do to help, please reach out. But that's where I can be found. Vera-Lee, I really thoroughly do appreciate you having me on and appreciate your time. This was fun getting to know each other a little bit here.
Yeah, it sure was. Thank you so much.
I loved learning about you too through throughout the process. That's always, I think, the cool part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm the same. Like, I've got so many different stories, and I'm like, well, I did little bits of my story just naturally come out when I'm talking to people because there's so many things I can relate to. But I don't ever, like, I would never be able to tell my whole story in one sitting. It'd just be going on forever.
You'll have to release like a 3-part podcast series of breaking it down.
Maybe an audio book.
There you go. I mean, that might be the next project. We'll see.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, another story, more WhyMe moments, and more reasons to feel inspired to change your adversity into your advantage. An integral part of the vision of the WhyMe movement is the ICE acronym, I's for Inspire. When you feel inspired, you are more likely to take action. C is for 2 things, actually. Connection. You are not alone in this world. There are always people here who want to help you get through your adversity. and feel positive about your life and your purpose. It is also for courage. Courage, in my opinion, is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And there lies the importance of connection. For sometimes we don't feel we have the courage to do things on our own. And yet once we have the emotional support of those people who we trust, it can help us to feel that fear and do it anyway. And lastly, the E is for empower. When we have that connection and the courage and the inspiration to know, get our clarity of purpose, well, that is when we feel empowered to take the action that we want to do to change some aspect of our lives for the better. If you would like my personal support in this area to help you get through adversity in your life, you can contact me at Vera-Lee Original on social media.